Hello, I'm Kirsten Murphy from the Vermont Developmental Disabilities Council, and this is the second video in a series of three where I review the progress that the council made in its work plan for year one of our 5-year state plan. So the things that we wanted to accomplish over 5 years, we had a bunch of planned activities, 55 of them actually, and this is part of our report on how we did with what we had planned to do. I will begin by sharing my screen. This video covers goals 2 and 3. So, goal area 2 is where the council had some ideas around projects that the council could do to address gaps in people's services. I think if you're familiar with the many needs that people with developmental disabilities have and the programs that we have in Vermont, there's still many things, many needs that go unmet. And so there are a lot of gaps, and the council focused on gaps in 3 areas. One, universal design and access, especially in healthcare. Second, housing. And third, transportation. So this goal reads, working with community partners, because we always work with our community partners, the council will address 3 gaps in critical services for people with developmental disabilities and their family members. Pretty straightforward. All right, objective 1. This has been reworded since the council originally wrote its 5-year plan. It's the one objective that we've changed. In collaboration with community partners, the council will create plain language health information and advocate for accessible spaces and recreation in order to improve the health and wellness of individuals with developmental disabilities in Vermont. That sounds kind of specific, and it is, because about a year into the 5-year plan, we began to see where the opportunities and work would take place in this objective. So the first of 4 activities were that we plan to build relationships with key stakeholders and experts familiar with Americans with Disabilities Act issues and with universal design. The ADA is the law, federal law, that entitles people to full access in many spaces and places and types of activities like work. The second activity that we planned for was that we would issue a request for proposals for SEEDS grants. SEEDS are small, innovative grants seeking small, innovative projects, there we go, that expand access to recreation and to healthcare facilities. And I'm gonna jump down to the next. There were 4, so it took me a couple slides to write these activities down. The third activity would be through an appropriation from the Centers for Disease Control, or the CDC, you probably hear of them, through a grant from them. The council would stand up the Competent Care for Kids program for the vaccination of children with disabilities. That program is designed to reduce the stress associated with the experience of getting a vaccination. So that was a project that we were really already working on before the year began. So that's why that objective is or activity is so specific. And then this is a very large project, is captured under new activity that we didn't know when we were writing our work plan this would happen. So through the Inclusive Healthcare Partnership Project, the council will develop a portfolio of plain language health information and train healthcare providers in inclusive practices. So that again sounds quite specific to a project that we've named the Inclusive Healthcare Partnership Project. And in fact, we received two quite generous grants that are allowing us to undertake that work. A grant from the Vermont Department of Health in their health equity project, and then another $94,000 through the federal government for money that helps expand the public health workforce. So we have combined those two pots of money and undertaken a really great project around creating plain language healthcare information and training providers about communication with and access for people with IDD in medical settings. So how do we do on those 4 activities? Let's see. So the first activity really had to do with just research and getting to know some of the issues around access in healthcare and recreation. We began that research in the winter. We work with the SILCS Healthcare Advisory Committee, and we also worked with the Vermont Center for Independent Living, and that research is continuing. So not a big piece of activity, but something that we're continuing to work on. Then the next activity is broken down because we wrote 2 grants around inclusive types of recreation. One was a grant to Vermont Adaptive Ski and Sports, and we awarded that grant all the way back in the fall, but the grant was delayed. The grantee was not, we were very slow in writing the grant agreement. I will own some of that as being maybe our fault, but also the grantee was very slow to respond to some of our questions around building that grant agreement. And so the grant agreement just didn't get off the ground. And we have made a pledge to $5,000 to this organization, and the work is ongoing, so we are happy to support it. The work here is promoting their wellness program where they have weekend retreats and work on wellness goals for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and give them a lot of training in accessible recreational activities. So that grant has been moved to year 2. There was a second grant under this activity, which was to the ARC Rutland area. We awarded that for their basically for their sensory room and for supporting people to access that room. The grant was awarded in the fall. The work continued and the grant ended. Just say it was not, in my mind, a particularly successful grant. We ended up not giving them the full amount of the grant by a small amount of money. I think they returned about $600 because they really didn't accomplish all of the things that they said they would in their grant agreement. We were sorry about that. It had to do with a staff change, and we hope to continue to partner with ARC in the future. For the most part, they received most of this funding, but the grant was not quite as expansive as we'd hoped it would be. You'll remember that the third activity was our Confident Care for Kids project, which was a collaboration with Vermont Family Network and the Center for Disability and Community Inclusion at UVM. And we were already doing this project, providing sensory-friendly vaccination environments for kids that needed a less stressful way to get their COVID and other vaccines. This was funded by extra money that the federal government gave us through the Centers for Disease Control. And in fact, we continued that project. Lots of kids got to use sensory toys and receive their vaccines by providers who had received special training. It seemed very successful. I will tell you one story of a dad shared with us a story of their son not getting his vaccination twice, 2 tries, in environments that were not set up to reduce kids' stress. And this child finally went to a clinic that had been part of Confident Care for Kids, and bingo, the vaccination was quite successful and the child was not upset or traumatized in any way. So that's the kind of goal, that's the kind of thing we were hoping for with this project. We are almost done with it, but I marked it as continuing because there's still a small amount of money to spend toward supporting low stress vaccination. And then remember, our new activity is the Inclusive Healthcare Partnership Project, again in the spring, and which is continuing and will continue for the next year, probably year and a half. A very big project, more than a couple $100,000 worth of work. We have a team assembled working with us to create plain language health information on a wide range of topics, as well as to revise and improve a provider training that we have used in the past, and then get it out to healthcare clinics, especially federally qualified healthcare clinics. All right, so that was one of 3 objectives in goal area 2. The second gap in service that we address is housing. Working with community partners, the council will develop and promote housing options for adults with developmental disabilities. These living options must be affordable, foster independence, ensure necessary support, and assist in the development of friendships and other community connections. All right, so that's the objective, and we had 3 activities. First, we would build relationships with key stakeholders and experts familiar with housing issues and design options, and learn about housing options for people with IDD and other states. This is often where we start. Housing was a brand new area for our staff. We were not housing experts, and we have learned a ton about housing in the last year and joined many different housing coalitions and work groups, and gotten to network with a lot of people who know a lot about affordable housing in Vermont. The second is we would support family members and self-advocates advocating for alternatives to the limited housing options for adults with IDD. So the problem identified by our members when they were creating this 5-year plan is there aren't a lot of options other than shared living or group homes. Very few people live in independent situations, but not necessarily with the support they need. So that's not much of a menu of choice in housing, service supported housing. So we supported family members and self-advocates in engaging in advocacy, both through the legislature and the executive branch around that, addressing that problem. And then finally, we would advocate that portion of the American Rescue Plan Act funds, so a pot of money that the Agency of Human Services had, we would advocate that a part of that money be used to develop and pilot alternative housing models. And in fact, we were successful in getting $25,000, not for pilot projects, but just for a study in the early stages of what are these pilots going to look like. So how did we do? In all 3 cases, the work is successfully undertaken and ongoing. Our research was initiated. We did a lot of work around housing and networking, and even became identified in a housing bill as a group that would oversee some ongoing research in housing. So yes, that work is continuing. Check. Second, we would provide technical assistance to families and self-advocates. We work with a family advocacy group, and they were out in front here, but we met with them regularly and provided technical assistance around how to advocate for their issue, which is housing. We also work with self-advocates to get their voice involved in the housing conversation. And then finally, leveraging some funding. which we did successfully do in getting $25,000 for an initial study. So we're not there yet with what we imagine. We'd like more of that money, but to go to housing, but we were able to get a piece of it. All right, third objective, transportation. Working with community partners, the council will develop and promote more affordable, convenient, and flexible transportation options for people with developmental disabilities. I would say of all our grant areas, this is our state plan areas, this is the one that I feel I struggle with the most to find a meaningful role for the council. So as you'll see, there's been some progress, but not as much as we'd like to see. First activity, build relationships with key stakeholders and experts familiar with transportation issues. Learn about transportation options for people with disabilities in other states. Second activity, we would monitor the Transportation Advisory Committee for Elders and People with Disabilities and other legislative committees of jurisdiction. And third, we would advocate that some of the American Rescue Plan Act funds for home and community-based services. So again, this particular pot of money that the Agency of Human Services has, we would advocate that some of that money be used to support expanded transportation for people who receive home and community-based services. So how did we do? Here are 3 bar graphs. In terms of building relationships, we met with the Department of Transportation a couple of times, and we attended an excellent summit. The chair of our council, we supported him to also attend that summit. And work continues in building relationships in the transportation space. Again, a space where staff, this was new for staff. It's not an area we've worked in previously. We did find that the connections were hard to establish with the specific advisory committee that the Department of Transportation has. So that goal or that objective is moved to year 2. And third, it had to do with leveraging or getting some of that money the Agency of Human Services has. And we have provided comment and continue to provide comment advocating for more resources around transportation. Small amount of activity, but something that we are indeed doing. All right, that ends goal area 2. And we move on this video to goal area 3, where we have 2 objectives. This goal has to do with serving an underserved group in our state. And the underserved group that we focus on in our 5-year plan is people with higher support needs. So people with complex disabilities. The council will advocate that individuals with complex disabilities and/or substantial support needs have equitable access to and appropriate supports to realize opportunities for employment, social engagement, and personal development. So more best practices to support people who have high support needs. It's the best way I can say that. All right. The first of our 2 objectives here has to do with what's called customized employment. So that is a type of supported employment where the job is maybe not following a usual job description, but might be a piece of a job, a specific activity that a company could use help with. It might be a small business type opportunity for someone. It has to do with building a job that really fits the talents and interests of the individual with the disability. And often this is a good approach for people with higher support needs. So the objective here reads, working with community partners, the council will develop and promote customized, integrated employment opportunities for individuals with complex disabilities and/or substantial support needs. When we talk about integrated employment, that's a term that is not as familiar in our state. In some states, there's something called a sheltered workshop where people are taken in a kind of outside of the regular job world and work together in a workshop where they are in fact allowed to be paid less than minimum wage. That's the real crime, or I would say it's not technically a crime, but the real tragedy of sheltered workshops is that people are paid a pittance, just pennies on the dollar. And often the work is very boring and repetitive and may also not even be that meaningful. It may be kind of made up work. We don't have sheltered workshop in Vermont. We closed the last one a long time ago. But when we talk about integrated employment, we mean employment that is in regular job settings, right? A job at your local hardware store. That's integrated employment. And that term is used a lot because it's as opposed to things like sheltered workshops, where people with disabilities aren't part of regular mainstream jobs. So under this objective, we had a couple of activities. One, we would create and convene a community of practice. That's a group of people focused on customized integrated employment and entrepreneurial opportunities. That's owning your own business, entrepreneurial opportunities, especially for individuals with complex disabilities. So creating a community of practice means pulling together a group of people that care about a certain issue or activity, and they meet regularly to build their own understanding and to accomplish some goals they might have. And then second, we would issue a request for proposals for SEEDS grants. Remember those small innovative projects that support customized employment through training, outreach, or pilot project. So those were the two activities: issue a grant and create a community of practice. How did we do? The community of practice was not something that could get off the ground initially, but in fact, we have established a community of practice around customized employment. It is a group of about 10 families that meet regularly to promote customized employment, best practices of customized employment, and to support each other as they try to build those types of employment opportunities for their family member. And second was a SEEDS grant around training, which we successfully partnered, gave out a grant, it was really a contract, with a firm called Griffin Hamas. They are leaders in customized employment. They provided an excellent, extensive training that both family members and providers attended online during the latter part of the summer and fall, and then also came together on a Saturday for the final day of that course. The course was completed, and in fact, it's the families that participated in that course that are now our community of practice. So check and check, 2 pink boxes, both of those activities were accomplished. We're really looking forward to continuing the work of promoting the very best practices in customized employment and in supporting individuals with high support needs to have jobs and real jobs. Second objective is more in the area of other types of support services other than employment. So sort of day-to-day activities of daily living, we call them, or developing relationships, relationship building. So working with community partners, the council will develop and promote opportunities for adults with complex disabilities and or substantial support needs to increase social engagement, meaning friendships, and independence. And again, we had 2 activities. First, we would create and convene a community of practice focused on improving adult services for people with complex disabilities. And second, we would issue a request for proposals for SEEDS grants. It's going to sound really familiar, seeking small, innovative projects that support the skill development of adults with complex disabilities. So, community of practice and a grant for more training, very much structured the same way as our first objective. How did we do? We have been monitoring an opportunity, trying to find an opportunity for a community of practice of families that want to promote better, more meaningful services, especially those around skill development for people with IDD who have high support needs. We have not really found that opportunity yet. We're going to revise that activity and move it to year 2. So not really accomplished, doesn't mean it's not going to happen, but not accomplished in year 1. And then second, the idea of a training opportunity. We did find an excellent grantee who is a provider who teaches the Essentials for Living curriculum, pieces of that, to individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. It's not a curriculum that's used much in Vermont, and she came and introduced it to a group of families who have individuals with higher support needs who might benefit from using this framework for their family member. So that course was completed. We were successful in making about a $10,000 investment and bringing that, the idea of using that curriculum to Vermont. We were lucky enough to have a director of a larger developmental services agency participate in that course. So hopefully planting the seeds, if you will, the seed of a good idea that we look forward to continuing to try to move forward. All right, so that is the end of tape 2 and of goal areas 2 and 3. There is a third tape if you want to learn more. Thank you so much.